An old woman in nursing scrubs, her face etched with the lines of a forgotten war, saw a young Marine bleed out. With 200 stairs ahead and no one else to help, she did the unthinkable. The autumn evening air had a bite to it, a cold that seeped into the bones and promised a harsh winter. For Eleanor Vance, 60 years old and feeling every one of them, the chill was just another ache to add to the collection. She pushed open the heavy glass doors of the community hospital, her shift finally over. Her hands, gnarled and spotted with age, but still possessing a surgeon's steadiness, flexed and unflexed as she stepped into the fading light. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and the lines on her face told stories she'd long since stopped telling. Stories of humid jungles, the whine of helicopters, and the metallic smell of blood under a foreign sun. All she wanted now was the quiet of her small apartment, a cup of hot tea, and the comfortable silence of being alone. She took a deep breath, the scent of dying leaves and city exhaust filling her lungs. It was a world away from the sterile, antiseptic smell that clung to her scrubs. Peace. That's all she'd wanted when she left the army, all those decades ago. A quiet life to make up for the noise of her youth. She was just another part-time nurse now, a relic from another era. That fragile peace shattered in a single, violent moment. It wasn't a sharp crack, but 3 dull, heavy thuds that tore through the evening chill. It was a sound Eleanor knew intimately, a sound that bypassed her ears and went straight to the primal part of her brain. Gunshots. Chaos erupted instantly. A woman screamed, a high, piercing sound that was cut short by the frantic shouts of others. People scattered like birds, their footsteps a frantic, panicked drumbeat against the pavement. Inside the hospital lobby she had just left, staff dropped to the floor behind desks, their faces pale with terror. Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't run. Decades of training took over. In one fluid motion that belied her age, she dropped low, using a thick concrete planter as cover. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the scene. Her heart hammered against her ribs, an old, familiar rhythm. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a combat medic again. Then she saw him, a young man in a Marine Corps dress uniform, lying sprawled on the concrete, not 20 feet from the entrance. He had fallen with a sickening finality, his white, gloved hands stark against the dark, spreading stain on his arm and side. It was crimson, shockingly bright under the buzzing security lights. He had been ambushed, the victim of a robbery gone wrong. They had taken his wallet and, when he resisted, they had shot him and vanished into the urban shadows. For a heartbeat, the world went silent for Eleanor. She saw the glazed look in the young man's eyes, the shallow, ragged breaths he was taking, and she saw that no one was moving toward him. The security guards were locked down inside. The other staff were paralyzed by fear. The emergency protocols had been triggered, sealing the entrances and shutting down the elevators. Help wasn't coming. He was alone, bleeding out on the cold ground. In that moment, Eleanor Vance made a choice. The quiet life she had built for herself could wait. A soldier was down, and in her world, you never, ever leave a soldier behind. The war she thought she had left in the jungles of Vietnam came rushing back. Eleanor's mind was clear, a cold, sharp instrument honed by the horrors of the past. She moved from behind the planter, her steps low and deliberate, ignoring the distant sound of sirens that felt a lifetime away. She reached the fallen Marine, her knees cracking as she knelt in the spreading pool of his blood. His eyes flickered open, filled with pain and confusion. He couldn't have been more than 20. "Stay with me, son," she said, her voice a low, steady command that cut through his haze. There was no time. The wound in his upper arm was arterial, pumping life onto the pavement with every beat of his weakening heart. She ripped a long strip from the hem of her own worn scrubs, her gnarled fingers working with a speed that was terrifyingly precise. She fashioned a makeshift tourniquet, cinching it tight above the wound, her movements economical and sure. This, she knew, this horror was an old friend. She looked up at the hospital. The main entrance was sealed. The elevators were dead. But there was another way, the side emergency stairwell, a grim concrete spire rarely used. It led directly to the surgical ward on the 5th floor. 200 steps. A vertical mountain of concrete and steel. The Marine was tall and broad-shouldered, packed with the dense muscle of a young warrior. He outweighed her by 100 pounds. But courage is not measured in weight. With a grunt that tore from deep within her chest, Eleanor leveraged his body, pulling his good arm over her shoulder. She braced herself, bent her knees, and drove upwards with a strength she hadn't called upon in 40 years. Her spine screamed in protest, and for a terrifying second, her legs trembled, threatening to give way. But then she was upright, the crushing weight of the young man a familiar burden on her back. She staggered toward the stairwell door and kicked it open. The darkness inside was thick, broken only by the sickly yellow glow of emergency lights flickering erratically. The air was cold, stale, and smelled of dust and despair. She took the first step, then the second. Each step was an agony. Her breath came in ragged, burning gasps. The Marine's blood soaked through her scrubs, warm and sticky against her back. The silence of the stairwell was absolute, broken only by the sound of her labored breathing, his soft groans of pain, and the wet, shuffling scrape of her shoes on the concrete. Doubt began to creep in, a cold poison. You're too old for this. You're gonna kill you both. Then, the flickering lights began to play tricks on her mind. The concrete walls seemed to melt away, replaced by the suffocating green of jungle canopy. The smell of dust became the smell of mud and cordite. The Marine's groans became the cries of other boys, boys whose faces she could never forget. Her PTSD, a sleeping dragon for years, had awoken with a vengeance. She was no longer in a hospital stairwell. She was on a ridge outside Keysan, trying to carry a dying friend to a dust-off that would never come. Around the halfway mark, her vision began to tunnel. Black spots danced before her eyes. Her left knee, filled with old shrapnel, gave out. She collapsed onto the landing, the Marine's weight driving her to the hard concrete. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up her leg. For a moment, she lay there, gasping, defeated. This was it. She had failed. But then, the Marine behind her stirred. He let out a faint, desperate whisper, too weak to form a word. It was the sound of a life refusing to be extinguished. It cut through the ghosts of the past and the pain of the present. It was the only thing in the world that mattered. She remembered her oath. Not the one she took as a nurse, but the older, deeper one sworn in the heat of battle. Leave no one behind. A raw, primal growl escaped her lips. She pushed the ghost away. She ignored the fire in her knee. Bracing her hand against the cold metal railing, she forced herself up, inch by painful inch, dragging the weight of the Marine and the weight of her memories with her. She was no longer climbing. She was fighting, and she would not lose. Willpower is a muscle. Eleanor's was forged in fire, and now it burned with a white-hot intensity. She pushed onward and upward, her world narrowed to a single, brutal focus, the next step. The concrete blurred beneath her feet, the flickering lights became a strobe, and the sound of her own heartbeat was a war drum pounding in her ears. She stopped thinking, stopped feeling the pain. She was a machine, fueled by a single, unyielding purpose. He was alive because she had not stopped. Finally, through the haze of exhaustion, she saw it. A sliver of bright, clean light under a door at the top of the final flight. The emergency ward. The sight sent a surge of pure adrenaline through her veins. A final, desperate burst of strength. She powered up the last few stairs, her body trembling so violently she could barely stay upright. She kicked the door open and staggered into the brightly lit corridor. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the controlled chaos of the ER froze. Doctors and nurses, alerted to the incident below, but trapped by the lockdown, turned as one. Their mouths fell open. They saw an apparition, a ghost from forgotten war. A small, silver-haired old woman, drenched in sweat and blood, her face a mask of grim determination, carrying a full-grown Marine across her shoulders. The sight was so impossible, so primal, that it defied all logic. The spell broke. A senior doctor shouted, "Get a gurney now!" Nurses rushed forward, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. Eleanor pushed herself the last few feet to the nearest gurney and, with a final, desperate effort, lowered the Marine onto the mattress. She was careful with his injured arm, her hand steady to the very last moment. The instant his weight left her, the strings holding her together snapped. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold, tiled floor beside the bed. She didn't faint. She simply had nothing left. Drenched in sweat, her scrubs clinging to her like a second skin, she lay on her side, her chest heaving, pulling in ragged gulps of air. The room exploded into action. The medical team swarmed the Marine, barking orders for 4 lines, pressure bandages, and a surgical prep. Monitors beeped to life, their steady rhythm a fragile promise. But even amidst the frantic activity, the staff couldn't look away from the woman on the floor. Whispers spread like wildfire. She carried him all the way up the stairs. "Look at her. She must be 60. Who is she?" A young nurse knelt beside Eleanor, offering water. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Eleanor's eyes were closed, her face pale and drawn. In her exhaustion-fueled delirium, she whispered a name no one there had ever heard. "It's okay, Miller. I got you. I got you home." The young nurse stared, a chill running down her spine. The story rippled out from that room. The colleagues who had hidden in fear now emerged, their faces a complex tapestry of shame and admiration. They had seen bravery before, but this was something else. This was ancient, elemental. This was the raw, unyielding courage to stare into the abyss and refuse to blink. The legend of Eleanor Vance was born in those hushed, awestruck whispers. Dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in soft shades of gray and rose. Inside the hospital, the night's adrenaline had given way to a heavy, somber calm. Eleanor had refused a bed, instead dozing fitfully in a hard plastic chair beside the Marine's room in the ICU. The doctors had told her he was stable. The surgery had been a success. She had bought them the time they needed. He was going to live. The words brought a profound, bone-deep relief, but no rest. Just as the morning shift began its quiet shuffle, a low murmur started on the ground floor. It was a sound that didn't belong in a hospital, a deep, resonant hum of unseen activity. Nurses on the lower floors began peering out the windows, their conversations stopping mid-sentence. A security guard's voice, crackling over a walkie-talkie, was filled with disbelief. "You're not going to believe this." The news traveled up the stairwell that had been her battlefield, carried in hushed, urgent voices. "They're here. The Marines are here." Eleanor rose stiffly, her body a symphony of aches. She limped to the large window at the end of the corridor, her curiosity overriding her exhaustion. She looked down, and her breath caught in her throat. The hospital grounds were gone. In their place was a sea of blue and gold. Not a dozen, not 50, but hundreds of Marines stood in perfect, silent formation. They stretched from the hospital gates down the block and around the corner, rank upon disciplined rank. 500 of them, their boots planted on the earth, their faces solemn in the pale morning light. They hadn't come with weapons or anger. They had come in silence, a silence that thundered with more power than any battle cry. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Commuters slowed their cars, staring. People emerged from nearby buildings, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. This was not a parade or a protest. This was a pilgrimage. A younger nurse gently took Eleanor's arm. "They're asking for you." Hesitantly, Eleanor allowed herself to be led downstairs and out the main entrance. She was still in yesterday's scrubs, stained with sweat and a stranger's blood. She felt small, old, and utterly exposed as she stepped into the crisp morning air. Every head turned towards her. And then, as one, a ripple started at the front and spread through the ranks like a wave. 500 right hands snapped to their foreheads in a single, perfectly synchronized salute. The sound of it, a sharp, collective rustle, was the only thing that broke the profound silence. A tall, broad-shouldered officer with salt and pepper hair and a chest full of ribbons stepped forward. He stopped 3 paces from her, his own salute crisp and unwavering. His eyes, like hers, held the memory of old wars. He held her gaze for a long moment before speaking, his voice low but carrying across the silent square. "For one of our own," he said. The words were a key, unlocking a part of her heart that had been sealed shut for 40 years. It wasn't just for the young man upstairs. It was for her. They saw her, the forgotten soldier, the quiet nurse. They were claiming her as theirs. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Then another. The tears of a soldier who had finally, after a lifetime of waiting, been welcomed home. The image of 500 Marines saluting a lone, elderly nurse became an icon. It graced the front pages of newspapers and led news broadcasts across the nation. In a country weary of division and conflict, the story of Eleanor Vance was a unifying force. She was inundated with interview requests and offers for book deals, but she refused them all with a quiet, firm dignity. The spotlight was not a place she had ever felt comfortable. Her work was in the quiet rooms of healing, not under the glare of television cameras. But the Marines did not forget. They didn't just see her as a hero, they saw her as family. A few weeks after the incident, a delegation arrived at the hospital. They didn't come to give her a plaque. They came with a proposal. They asked if she would consider visiting the nearby base to speak with their young combat medics. Hesitantly, she agreed. The first time she stepped onto the training grounds, the familiar sights and sounds, the rhythmic chant of platoon runs, the smell of diesel and discipline, threatened to overwhelm her. But then she stood before a classroom of young, eager faces, and something shifted inside her. She wasn't there to relive her trauma. She was there to prevent theirs. She taught them things no textbook could. How to pack a wound with nothing but gauze and sheer will. How to keep a soldier talking, to keep them tethered to life when their body is screaming for them to let go. How to manage your own fear so you can be the calm in their storm. She spoke of her time in Vietnam, not as a war story, but as a series of hard-won lessons in saving lives. In teaching them, Eleanor began to heal herself, sharing the burden she had carried alone for decades. Transforming her pain into a shield for a new generation was a powerful form of therapy. The ghosts of her past didn't vanish, but they grew quieter, their voices replaced by the respectful questions and earnest gratitude of the young soldiers before her. They gave her a new, unofficial title, Honorary Chief. It was a title she cherished more than any medal. Meanwhile, the city's justice system moved swiftly. The armed robbers, identified from security footage, were apprehended within days. Their trial was short, their guilt undeniable. The news of their conviction brought a sense of closure to the community. Eleanor's story had another, wider impact. Donations flooded into veterans' support charities. Local governments started new initiatives to provide better health care and housing for aging veterans. People were reminded that heroes often don't wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they were faded nursing scrubs and walk with a limp. Eleanor had not only saved one life, she had sparked a national conversation about duty, sacrifice, and the debt owed to those who have served. She had, in her quiet way, started a new mission. Years slipped by, softening the sharp edges of memory, but never erasing the mark of that night. Eleanor Vance remained at the hospital, though she eventually reduced her hours. To new staff, she was just the quiet, kind, silver-haired nurse who knew exactly how to calm a frightened patient. But to those who knew the story, she was a living legend. The stairwell was repainted, the lighting upgraded, but its walls seemed to hold an echo of her determined steps. The Presidential Medal of Freedom, which she had accepted with quiet humility in a ceremony she barely remembered, lay nestled in a simple wooden box in her sock drawer. Her real trophies were the thank you card from patients and the annual visits from the Marine she had saved. He was a captain now, with a wife and 2 young children who called her Aunt Ellie. He never failed to visit on the anniversary of the day she saved his life, his presence a living testament to her courage. The Marines remained her steadfast family. They made sure her car always ran, her her sidewalk was shoveled in winter, and she was never alone on holidays. They would sit in her small, tidy living room, sharing stories and coffee, a band of brothers and sisters bound not by blood, but by a shared code of honor. They continued to tell her story to every new class of recruits, a parable of what courage truly means. In her quietest moments, often sitting by a window watching the seasons change, Eleanor would reflect. She had learned that night that the battlefield can be anywhere, a jungle clearing, a city street, a dark stairwell. She learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. She had been terrified. It is the choice to act in spite of it. It doesn't belong to the young or the strong. It belongs to anyone willing to take that first impossible step for someone else. Her legacy was not cast in bronze or carved in stone. It was written in the lives she had touched. The Marine who got a second chance at life, the generations of medics she trained, and the countless people who heard her story and were inspired to be a little braver, a little kinder. Eleanor's story proves that the most powerful acts of heroism often happen far from the spotlight, born from a simple, profound decision to not turn away. It reminds us that within ordinary people lies an extraordinary capacity for courage. If you were moved by the story of Eleanor Vance, the veteran nurse who embodied the creed of leaving no one behind, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel for more stories that matter. We want to hear from you. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible act of bravery? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and start your comment with the word respect to honor her sacrifice. Don't forget to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you for being part of our community.